Section 54 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 35, Part 1. In the vast church of the Santa Chiara, with its open nave which spread itself on every side like a magic hall of romance, the wide floor and the altars of the side chapels had been crowded all day by prostrate worshippers. But when Inglesant entered it about sunset, it was comparatively empty. A strange, unearthly perfume filled the church, and clouds of incense yet hovered beneath the painted ceiling, and obscured the figure of the saint chasing his enemies. Streaks of light, transfigured through the colored prism of the prophets and martyrs that stood in the painted glass, lighted up the wreaths of smoke, and colored the marbles and frescoes of the walls and altars. The mystic glimmer of the sacred tapers in the shaded chapels, and the concluding strains of the chanting before the side altars, which had followed the vesper service and benediction, filled the church with half light and half shadow, half silence and half sound, very pleasing and soothing to the sense. Inglesant passed up the church towards the high altar, before which he knelt, and as he did so, a procession carrying the sacrament entered by another door, and advanced to the altar, upon which it was again deposited. The low, melancholy monsieur, half entreating, half desponding, spoke to the heart of a man of a language like his own, and, as this theme was taken up by one of the organs, the builder's art and the musician's melted into one, in tier after tier of carved imagery, wave after wave of mystic sound. All conscious thought and striving seemed to fade from the heart, and before the altar, and amid the swell of sound, the soul lost itself, and lay silent and passive on the eternal love. Behind the high altar, Inglesant found the friar by the grave of the wise king. Upon the slabs of the Gothic tomb, covered with carving and bas-relief, the king is seated and dressed in royal robes, but upon the sarcophagus he lies in death, bereft of all his estate, and clothed in no garment but a Franciscan's gown. Beside him lies his son in his royal robes, covered with fleurs de lis, and other tombs of the kingly race of Anjou surround him, all emblazoned with coat, armor, and device of rank. Between the tombs of the two kings stood the friar, his head bowed upon his hands. The light grew every moment less and less bright, and the shadows stretched ever longer and longer across the marble floor. The lamps before the shrines and the altar tapers in the funeral chapels shone out clearer and more distinct. The organs had ceased, but the dolorous chanting of the monsieur from beyond the high altar still came to them with a remote and wailing tone. Inglesant advanced towards the friar, who appeared to be aware of his presence by instinct, and raised his head as he drew near. He returned no answer to Inglesant's greeting, but seated himself upon a bench near one of the tombs, and began at once, like a man who has little time to spend. "I am desirous," he said, "of telling you at once of what has occurred to me. Who can tell what may happen at any moment to hinder unless I do? It is a strange and wonderful story in which you and I and all men would be but puppets in the divine hand, were not the divine. Love such that we are rather children led onward by their father's hand, welcomed home by their mother's smile." It was indeed a strange story that the friar told Inglesant to the darkening church. In places it was incoherent and obscure. The first part of his narrative, as it relates to others besides himself, is told here in a different form, so that, if possible, what really happened might be known. The latter part, being untranslatable into any other language, and inexplicable upon any basis of fact, must be told in his own words. "When you left me at the mountain chapel," said the friar, "I thought of nothing but that I had escaped with life. I thought I had met with a fantastic whose brain was turned with monkish fancies, and I blessed my fortunate stars that such had been the case. I thought little of the divine vengeance that dogged my steps. When Inglesant met Malvolti upon the mountain pass, as he gathered from the friar's narrative, the latter, utterly penniless and undone, having exhausted every shift and art of policy, and being so well known in all the cities of Italy that he was safe in none of them, had bethought himself of his native place. It was indeed almost the only place where the character was unknown, and his person comparatively safe. But it had other attractions for the hunted and desperate man. Malvolti's father had died when his son was a boy, and his mother in a year or two married again. His stepfather was a harsh and unkind to the fatherless child, and the seeds of evil were shown in the boy's heart by the treatment he received. But a year after this marriage, a little girl was born, who won her way at once into the heart of the forlorn and unhappy lad. He was her constant playmate, protector, and instructor. For several years the only happy moments of his life were passed, when he could steal away with her to the woods and hills, wandering for hours together alone or with the woodcutters and charcoal burners, and when after a few years the unkindness of his parents and his own restless and passionate nature sent him into the world in which he played so evil a part, the image of the innocent child followed him into senses of vice, and was never obliterated from his memory. The murmur of the leaves above the fouling floor, where they lay together during the midday heat, the splash of the fountains, where they watched the flocks of sheep drinking, followed him into strange places and foreign countries, and arose to his recollection in moments of danger and even of passion and crime. The home of Malvolti's parents had been in the suburb of a small town of the Bolognes. Here, at some little height above the town on the slope of the wooded hills, a monastery and chapel had been erected, and in course of time some few houses had grouped themselves around, among which that of Malvolti's father had been the most considerate. The sun was setting behind the hills when Malvolti, weary, dispirited, and dying of hunger, came along the winding road from the south, which skirted the projecting spurs of the mountains. The slanting rays penetrated the woods, and shone between the openings of the hills, lighting up the grass-grown buildings of the monastery, and the belfry of the little chapel, where the bell was ringing for vespers. Below, the plain stretched itself peacefully, a murmur of running water blended with the tolling of the bell. A waft of peace and calm, like a breeze from paradise, fell upon Malvolti's heart, and he seemed to hear soft voices welcoming him home. He pictured to himself his mother's kind greeting, his sister's delight. Even his stern stepfather's figure was softened in the universal evening glow. It was a fairy vision, in which the passing years had found no place, where the avenging footsteps that follow sin did not come, and which had no reality in actual existence. He turned the angle of the wood, and stood before his home. It lay in ruins and desolate. End of section 54. Read by Elijah Fisher.